Nigerian romance scams are alive and kicking and still going, and people are falling for it. Sadly for myself, I would have to say that I definitely did fall for it, but I was one of the lucky ones, and I guess my intuition, my instinct kept bugging me that something was right off from the start. Most of these scammers are contacting women on Instagram. They do their homework, they know. They're picking people who they think are single, and usually they're going for someone who looks a bit vulnerable. I feel like they have some kind of prerequisite of who they're searching for when they're looking through profiles. Like the profile photo was wow. Like this guy was hot, okay? And he looked really nice. Like his photos actually looked like he was a nice person. The first thing that you should note when you're looking for a scammer, especially on Instagram, is that the account will be 2 first names. I opened his profile on Instagram, and I did note that the account was not that old, like maybe a year old. And I thought, okay, so it's not like a brand new profile. But as the messages got really like more personal, like he started to tell me about his past. Also, another story that he told me was that he had a son, and his son was, I think, 8 years old. And I did ask him, I said, oh, is he, living with his mum? And he said his mother left them when the child was 4 years old, that his son was living in a boarding school back in Arizona. The fact that his parents had died in a plane crash when he was young, like a child, and that's why his grandmother had looked after him. When the communication started, he told me that he was a doctor and that he was an orthopedic surgeon. Then I noticed that the actual messages were starting to get a little bit towards a kind of romantic sort of way. And out of the blue, he said to me that one day he was going to marry me. So I hadn't really had much contact with him at this stage, so it did feel a bit strange. And the messages kept coming. They were getting more romantic, full of, high hope to meet each other. And while that was okay, I did start to feel, and I'm really embarrassed to say this, that I did start to feel something like, well, okay, maybe this guy is for real. I kind of didn't really think much of it. I just thought, okay, well, maybe, this is someone I'm going to end up friends with or whatever. But he was really strong about the romantic side of it. And one day he just out of the blue told me that he loved me. And I thought that was also very strange, because who does that? I realized that he was actually messaging me at certain times of the day, and that would be around the same time. And I did even check like what Israel's time was, and it was actually like morning before you would go to work or do your rounds as a doctor, and the other was after he'd finished work at night. Yeah, and I just kind of thought it was actually very sweet that he was, messaging me before he went to work and when he got back. And yeah, at this stage, as embarrassed as I am to say, I started to develop, I guess, some kind of attachment to the routine that we were having. But I still felt it was strange, like it was almost too good to believe. And like what they say, if it's too good to believe, it usually is. Sometimes I would be talking to him and then it would just sort of go silent, and then he would come back with a very, loving kind of romantic kind of gesture through his words, but not answering my questions. And I did even think back then, hang on a minute, why is he not actually answering questions about being a doctor? I wasn't so engrossed in him and waiting for him to message me at that stage, but it did get to that. And that's when it got a little bit too much for me. And I was almost fighting what my body was reacting to, telling me to look into it further, which I was, but I probably wasn't doing it enough. And I still was, rolling along with how I was feeling with him and developing these kind of feelings for him. And I asked him if there was something I could do to help with the phone, because I knew a lot about iPhones, and it definitely didn't feel like the same person that I'd been speaking to all this time, because his speech changed, and this urgency that he had in his voice or in his words was different to what I experienced. But then I thought, maybe this is, the real him, still thinking that this guy was real at this stage. And to be fair, actually, that sounds about right for an iPhone repair, possibly in Israel anyway. After living there, I know these things. But if he had asked me for like 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 or whatever, I would have just straight away red flagged it. But he was very cunning in the way he went about it. Even though no matter how much you fall for that person, it was over Instagram. I decided to look at his profile again, and that was when I went into actually his followers and who he was following. I recognized a person that I knew, and I know this person. And so I decided to send her a message and just ask her if she knew anything about him. I noticed, because I started tracking him, was that he was on Google Hangouts, active, but he wasn't responding to my messages. And also that he'd been quite active on Instagram throughout the day. And that actually fucking pissed me off, because I thought, if he's not a scammer, he's an asshole. So when my friend contacted me via Facebook, I woke up and I immediately went into, alert mode and read through her message. And all I'd said was, I have a question for you. I hope I don't sound paranoid. She said, oh, it'll be a Nigerian scammer. Straight up that she said that. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I mentioned his name and she said, oh, I remember him. So I got onto Google, started a search of how to check an image, for whether it's real. And I came across Google reverse images or something it's called. And that was full of his photo with several other names and scam, 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 scam. As much as I knew this didn't feel right in the beginning, I obviously needed something to just confirm it to me, really confirm it to me. It's all on the internet. You just really have to know what you're searching for. But I was actually okay. I kind of laughed out loud when I realized it. But those few days of not knowing, but being highly suspicious after being asked for the money, I felt like my heart had been ripped out. And that's when I knew that this guy had sucked me in, really sucked me in, and that other people could have got far worse than what I did. What I took away from it was that, wow, I have some things, some issues that I need to actually address here. So I did spend some time, extra time meditating on it. So it kind of made me realize that I had to believe and trust in my intuition and my instinct, because so many of my relationships, when I felt like something was wrong or that something was happening, and they kept telling me that, I was just reading into it, or stop being silly, and all these kind of things would make me feel down. But I knew every single one of those relationships ended for the things that I actually could see were going to happen. So in the end, I knew that I was right, but I went through a whole shit of turmoil and years of putting up with abuse because of it, on a mental and a physical level in some cases. For me to learn from this mistake that I have to really believe and trust in my intuition and my instinct is the most positive thing that I could have ever hoped to have come out of this little nightmare. I hope that you've learned something from this, because I'd hate to see a situation worse than mine happen. And definitely do not give money to people. And yeah, do your research. That's all I can say. Good luck out there. And one thing I want you to take away from this is trust your instinct. So I'll see you next time.